Doesn't work. Alrighty, so I think the stream has started. Great. Yeah, the stream has started. Um, Now I need to share the link with some folks. How do I do that? There used to be a little thing here. Ah, there we go, share. It's been a while since I've done this. Okay, so I'm getting the link. Just going to share with my team. And after that, I will start the stream. Let's see. Um, so far, you're just seeing my title screen because I'm going to censor my team's Slack here. Hi, friends. Starting live stream that'll go over some component systems thinking featuring a React select component that I built. I'm just writing a note. I like doing live streams to explain, share ideas, plus they get saved afterwards, which is great. So if I go there, does that work? Yeah, it does. All right, cool. Alrighty, so I think I am ready. And now I am going to jump over to my face, hopefully. Okay, what was that? Command 3. I think it's showing my camera now. Um, just have to verify using the YouTube live stream thing. Just because so right now I'm streaming on a brand new computer that has never streamed via OBS before. OBS is the software I use to do my live streams. And hi, welcome. This is the first live stream I've done since joining Automatic. So I used to, for some context, I used to do these quite often at Help Scout as a form of knowledge sharing and also to kind of showcase some wacky ideas that I might be working on, or because the wacky ideas typically involve some tooling or some really, really deep component library kind of stuff. And it was just much easier for me to kind of explain through some of those mechanisms, some of those systems, and how they work and how things are kind of mapped out over video. I found that I'm much more eloquent in talking via video than I am writing. Also, writing takes a heck of a long time. Video, I just talk and then it's streamed and it's saved and it's great. So, happy Monday to you, this lovely August 26th, 8:45 a.m. in Toronto. Um, got some coffee right here. Okay, so I'm going to start my stream. Hopefully everything is okay. And if you're not watching, it's totally fine. I'm recording this just for the folks who are interested. It's probably going to be a little lengthy just because of the kind of topics that I'm going to be covering today. It'll be fine. It'll be fun. So today I'm going to be covering some component and system thinking by way of a React Select component that I recently built and tinkered with. And with that, I'm going to be sharing my screen. Hopefully this works. Again, brand new streaming system, have to use hotkey for things. Before I used to have like a separate monitor and my laptop on the side. And my laptop would act as basically my streaming panel where I would get to see my audio levels, my preview and all that kind of stuff. I don't have the luxury of that anymore. I just have a single screen, a single laptop. Hopefully this goes well. Okay, switching over to my desktop, and also there's no feedback for any of the keys I'm doing. So now I got to dare I check to see if my laptop preview is working. You're gonna get some Inception stuff going on. This is okay, yeah. So it's working. All right. So hopefully you're seeing my laptop, and you are seeing my screen rather, and you are seeing the demo I have for the React Accessibility Select component that I built recently. So this little guy, this fun little guy here, this is VoiceOver. I have that turned on currently on Mac OS. I don't have it speaking. I have my volume muted just because I won't be able to talk or hear myself otherwise. This will describe everything that VoiceOver is reading to me on the screen. And the idea behind this component that I built is in response to some of the accessibility work that I had to do in regards to drop-down-y kind of stuff. And I found it a little bit challenging to work within the existing drop-down system, so I figured I'd give it a shot, try building my own, and to see if maybe we can leverage some of the techniques, some of the systems from this in our current component library. And this is, um, in previous streams, I've stated how ferociously difficult drop-downs are. This is probably my fifth or sixth drop-down system I've ever built. It gets a little easier every single time, but every single time I do it, I get reminded of how many different moving parts, different mechanisms, different systems that are required to make this work and function okay. Let's say if you want a really good drop-down, that's where you're gonna put a lot of work into it. It's probably one of the most complicated components by far from a low-level primitive standpoint. If you compare it next to tables, buttons, all of those friends, drop-downs is the most complex, no questions asked. So with that, let's just demo my little drop-down, or my little select rather. So UI, it's very bare bones. I didn't do much with it. I just kind of based it off this W3 area 1.1, I think, believe 1.1. Doesn't say. Anyway, this accessibility example they have, I just kind of copied the styles here and put it into my dropdown. The style is a UI that can be tinkered with very simply, very easily. That's not the main thing. The main thing is to make sure that it is completely compliant with these specs. So in this example, right now I have VoiceOver turned on. And if I press up and down, you can see that it reads the items. Not only that, but it tells you what number the item is out of what. So for example, this Boreum thing is 15 out of 26. And as I go up and down, it'll continue to change. And as soon as I press enter, it tells me, it gives me the label, choose an element, and also the name of the selected item. If I press space, it'll open. If I press enter, it'll select it. There's a bunch of different keyboard support specs under here, and I made sure that I built all that into this React Select. So there are some enhancements I've added that aren't part of the specs, but I think are pretty important. So the big one being, whenever you highlight an item, it reads to you what that selected item is. This is not what happens in the accessibility example. I feel like this is important just because for those of folks who might be able to use the computer with some form of eyesight, so not completely blind, they would use a mouse to be able to navigate around, but the things might feel a little blurry. So they rely both on mice and also some mice, some sight, and also the screen reader. So with that, by giving this feature, they're able to still use their mouse and be confident in what they're selecting. Whereas if I were to look at this and squint, if nothing was reading back to me, I would have no idea what the heck I'm selecting. And by the way, a really, really good test for accessibility stuff is to just squint. Squint at your screen. Things will start becoming blurry, and try using it that way. And another way to do it, of course, is just completely turn your eyes off. Close your eyes and see if you're able to navigate through everything just by using VoiceOver. So here, as soon as I select over an item, you'll see that it reads. Up and down arrow works. The other interesting thing that I built into this is a UX kind of mechanism that you would find within macOS. So if I were to open up, say, Window, I can press up and down. It'll jump to the various items. But let's say I'm on Minimize. Dang it. Give me a second. Let's say I'm on Minimize. And you can see that the focus is on Minimize right now. And as soon as I move my mouse over to Task Manager, right, the focus is on the selection. There's two states actually. The selection is on Minimize, but my focus is on Task Manager. As soon as I press up and down, it should start from Task Manager. So if I press up, it should go to Extension. And at this point, they consolidate. The focus and the selection jumps to extension, and now I can just press up and down as normal. So what I mean by that is the keyboard navigation, the up and down indexing, has to work with mouse selection. So there's some mechanism inside of your select drop-down component that has to be able to understand those two different types of input methods. And that this is something that I don't, I might have seen one drop-down build ever from looking at open source. So very popular libraries such as Bootstrap and everything else, they don't really have this feature. So it might be a little bit difficult to see just because the highlight for Bootstrap is very, very light. But if I click on drop down button and my mouse is over action, so if I press up and down, it starts from action. And if I hover my mouse over something else here, if I press down, sorry, up, it should go to another action, but it doesn't. Just because the mechanisms within Bootstrap, there is no kind of consolidation between the two input methods. It's just it knows which one it's focusing on based on your keyboard inputs, and that's it. Yeah, so that mechanism has been built into my dropdown, which is great. Sorry, my select. Same kind of thing. Same kind of thing. Just a different UI representation. The other really funky kind of thing is I think this one has it. Should. Yeah. So there is a scroll into view kind of mechanism. So if I'm on this item here, Hassie, and if I press down, the next item will be cut off from view. So every single time a new item is focused, it needs to scroll into view. That way you can see it inside of the dropdown. So here, if I scroll up and down, you'll see that every single item, 100% guaranteed, will always be scrolled into view. That's important. And this is another feature that I built into the dropdown. I keep saying dropdown. It's a select. I'm just going to say dropdown from this point moving forward just because it's easier. So for my component, I built the ability to do, I don't even know what I called it, select looping, where if I continually press up, spam up or down, it'll loop. Last one 20 out of 20, it'll go 1 to 20 and so on. This can be turned on and off based on a prop, which is kind of nice. By default, selects and dropdowns don't do that. HTML selects, they just go to the top and the bottom and that's it. Mac OS, which is the one, this is my gold standard in terms of how we should think about dropdowns and stuff, just because they've done it so well. They have looping enabled, so I added that feature inside of here, which is kind of handy. The other interesting feature is when you have your mouse or your keyboard selected over something that is selected. So here, hopefully you'll catch this. So check out the voiceover text here. It'll say selected, comma, and then the value or the label of the item. So this is really handy when you're navigating up and down. You're able to see the thing that's been selected. And the text, by the way, is added via a ARIA label. It has nothing really to do with the checkmark. The checkmark is just a pure presentation kind of representation that something is selected, which is also so this is very handy. The last thing that I built into here that's worth mentioning is, and this is within the spec, it's printable characters. Any single time you start typing characters, the focus selection should jump to that specific character. So if you can do this within a default HTML select, that's how they work. It's basically a form of combo boxing, or I don't know, some form of search. So if I'm here in my macOS window dropdown, if I start typing EX, it'll go to extension. But if I start typing DO, it'll jump to download. Hopefully, download, yeah, like that. So in addition to typing, jumping, searching, there is a period where your search term will expire. This allows folks who, well, once you start typing something, you need to if you make a mistake, you can wait a bit, and then you can resume typing to be able to jump through stuff. So if I type Z, it'll go to zoom, wait a bit. If I type T, it'll hopefully jump to task manager, like so. But if I start just typing the word minimize, it won't just jump all over the place. Minimize. That's just because there is a debounced or expiration period where your search term just clears, and now you're able to type whatever it is you want to get. Yeah, so that mechanism has been built into the dropdown. So if I start typing, say, JA for Jared, JA, it'll jump there. But wait a bit, and now I type in DE, it'll jump there for Devin. I can't remember what timeout I set. Might have been 800 milliseconds or something like that. I'm sure we can make that available as a prop that can be easily changed. But that mechanism is built in here, and this works with the other types of navigation. So keyboard up, down, and mouse. So if I jump to say Dina, DI, and if I press up and down, it should go to Emerald and Wilma and so on. Up, 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 down, down, down. Great. So all that works together, which is really cool. Yeah, so all this work or these ideas kind of came, like I mentioned earlier in the video, from my work with the font picker. So here I have this new select that I built, rendering the UI that we might want to represent within the font picker. That being, we would like to show the font size that you're picking visually, graphically in the select. So here, if I have small text, you'll see that the text is small, normal, large, and huge. And all the features that we have that I've demonstrated in the previous drop-down selectee kind of thing is represented here. So mouse versus keyboard navigation is all here. If I start typing H, it'll jump to huge. If I select it, all the stuff will be announced that it's collapsed, that it's a menu pop-up button, and so on. Cool. So those are the various user experience mechanisms that we need to think about and build in our select dropdown component. And what you're seeing right here, this particular select dropdown, it is the barest bones thing that you can have in terms of dropdown UIs. There's no input search mechanism. There's no combo boxy, that kind of deal going on. There's a lot of things that are missing. And I guess I'll just I'll start talking about that right now, the little systems that make up this wonderful drop-down thing. But yeah, so for me, the whole goal of this particular component was to build something low-level, primitive-ish, that takes care of all the stuff that's required within the ARIA specs for you that you don't need to think about. Voiceover support, all that kind of stuff out of the box. And all you got to worry about is giving it your items, tapping into some like on-change handler to update your state, and potentially giving it some custom UI to render in the case of this customized font thing going on. Cool. Alrighty, so the various systems that are required from this select component thing. Right off the bat, so all this stuff was built inside of CodeSandbox, by the way, which is, I can't rave about this piece of software enough. It is amazing. I didn't need to, I did all this development in the browser. No local development, no whatever. Literally everything I've written was in the browser, which is cool. So right off the bat, we can see that there are various things going on. Font size picker, can kind of ignore this one. This one I just kind of built in just for demo purposes, which is this guy here. But the main stuff, the meat and potatoes, is all inside of this select directory. And there is another directory called Portal, which is one of the systems. So inside of a dropdown, select I'm going to turn voiceover off now. Cool. Alrighty. So geez. So how do I move this guy? All right, great. We start adding text. So systems of a dropdown selecty kind of thing. Systems. So what do I mean by systems? I'm not necessarily talking about state management systems, Redux, context, that kind of stuff. I'm talking about, I don't even know what the word is other than systems. Things that need to exist that are self-aware and that need to work with other entities that are self-aware, if that makes sense. So the first thing that we're going to touch upon is Portal. Portal is something that was introduced in React 16, which basically is a mechanism that's built within inside of React, specifically React DOM, that allows you to render a piece of UI, a piece of something, in a different spot. So what I mean by that, if I just take a look at this component here, inspect, the original root of this particular select is all the way nested down here, button. So traditionally, if you were to build a drop-down selected kind of component with a not JavaScript heavy solution, so your bootstraps, your specters, your bulmas, um, well, Bootstrap might have changed it since then, but an earlier version of Bootstrap, you would couple the drop-down the drop-down trigger, or your button or whatever it is, with the menu. And all that would kind of live inside. That way the menu knows how to position itself and so on, which is great, which is fine. It works. But the danger of that, and this is what I think a lot of people experience, which is why portaling became a thing, is when your UI is nested very deep within your application, all the styles and potentially the behaviors that you've set within your application can get inherited there. So typically UIs like this would be comprised of a UL, LI kind of HTML structure. List, unsorted list, unordered list, and list items, which makes sense. However, depending on how your application is written in CSS, and also your plugin CSS and so on, UL and LI elements are usually globally targeted in some way, which means you have to write styles that fight against those global styles, and you basically have to do it for a per usage basis. So every single time a dropdown appears in like your purchase page, you might have to write some styles for that dropdown in that purchase page. And you can see how terribly this scales. So portaling exists so that hopefully it'll help mitigate that problem, because if you start rendering your stuff at the root body level, the document body level, then you're protected from any styles that could be rendered within your application that target nested unordered lists or list items and so on. Here you have a relatively clean slate to be able to work from a styling standpoint, and also a JavaScript click eventy kind of standpoint in case you have global click handlers for LIs or for anchor tags and so on. You're relatively protected here, and that's just the idea. That's why portaling is it's a thing. It's a pretty important mechanism, pretty important concept, and and you can use it not just for dropdowns or selects. Modals are a really good candidate for portals, so that's that's the first thing we're going to consider: portal. That basically allows for the menu to pop up in a different location. And there are some things you need to consider when you create a portal. For my example here, I just created a simple portal component that is a nice little wrapper around the React DOM portal. But in my opinion, this is not good enough. Nowhere near good enough. That's just because with portal systems, you could have nested portaled elements. So depending on your UX, UI philosophy, you could have nested modals, for example, modals that spawn another modal or alerts or whatever. Essentially modals that are nested, that trigger off of one another. And typically when you have something that's portaled, you're able to close it by pressing escape. So if you have independent independent portaled objects, which are modals, that aren't aware of each other, then as soon as you press escape, there's a good chance all of them will close at some random order. That's bad. So you want them to close in the reverse order of which they're opened. So the moment you press escape, the latest thing that was popped up should close, and then press escape and close, 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 close. So you need some sort of escape, I don't know what to call it, escape management or some sort of modal system. Typically, these are called managers. Just a vague word to describe something that has to be aware of something else. So you need some sort of portal manager to be able to handle the opening and the closing in the order and however it is things are generated. Um, and this is kind of like independent of your drop-down select. This lives kind of outside, and drop-down select just happens to use it. So that's one of them. The portal and the portal and the portal manager system. The next one, and this is related kind of to the portal bit, is a system that I'm just going to call positioner. So because you're portaling a UI element outside of where it was supposed to really render, you have to position it somehow, just because it's now floating in space. So typically you would use a position fixed or position absolute kind of thing, and you need to give it some top and left measurements. So a system for positioning. You can write your own, certainly, but there is a very handy library that is like the go-to library for this kind of stuff. This is PopperJS, and this has been built into various component libraries and frameworks and stuff. It's built into something like Bootstrap, which is great. So Popper basically takes care of all of that math for you. It knows the original trigger point. Is there a draggable? Yeah, here we go. It knows the original trigger location. It doesn't supply the portaling mechanism for you, so you gotta do that. But as soon as you portal the thing, you rendered this little tooltip guy, this yellow tooltip guy. It knows how to position itself relative to its original trigger, even though they're in completely different spaces within the document, the browser. And what's cool, what's really, really cool about this is it is directionally aware. So if there is a chance that this element might get cut off by its bounding box or the window, it knows how to reposition itself if needed. And not only that, if you have a UI element that represents its direction, in this case an arrow, the arrow is also directionally aware. Not only that, let me see if I can zoom in. Yeah. So you can see the arrow moves with it. It knows where center is. And as soon as you move it, as it gets to the edge, the arrow stays there until you keep moving this guy. It's a very, very elegant system. Very wonderful stuff. Very complex. Lots of math going on. So TLDR, if you can, just use Popper. It'll save a lot of time and headache. Because I've tried building my own several times. None of them are as robust, thorough, or as performant as PopperJS. So that's something that's missing inside of here. We need some sort of position system to bind, to bind the portaled element, that being the select box thingy, to the trigger and knowing how to position it relative to that. And there's so many UX benefits from this. So a really common one is, let's see if Bootstrap does this. I'm sure they do. So by default, a dropdown will drop down. But if there's a chance that the dropdown will be cut off, it should drop up, like so. So this is like the very basic feature you would get from a position system. So you just get that mechanism, like that. And the other really complex thing about this guy is it needs to know so it needs to consolidate what the user's desired drops direction is. So as a user, I mean me, the person implementing this guy into my application. I'm like, all right, select. I want you to by default drop down. So when the drop down by default, I want you to drop downward. And drop down's like, Cool, I can do that for you. Um, and it'll try its darndest to drop the content down. However, if there's a chance it'll get cut off, the positioning system, this being Popper, will override it and being, oh no, you're gonna get cut off. In my best judgment, you're gonna drop upward. But as soon as you can drop down, just because you specified that you wanted to drop down, I'm gonna drop it down again. So yeah, it needs to be aware of the user's original choice and make a calculated decision based on that in order to drop up or down. And the more complicated thing is that not only is there up and down, but there's also left and right. You can drop something that, hopefully there's an example here. Left, drop left. Yeah. You can, there's so many directions you can go with this. Yeah, so you can drop something like this. And hopefully I can get this to cut off, maybe? Yeah, and if there's a chance that it'll get cut off, it'll position itself to the right and so on. Oops, I just saw myself. I'm gonna hide that. Great. Yeah, so positioning system, great, very intense. Takes care of that for you. Cool. Next, what do we need? And that is just like the two very complex systems to even render the thing onto the screen. What do we need now? We need some form of like a keyboard kind of system. Keyboard event. This is the guy that will handle all the keyboard inputs that you need for your select. In this case, I have it, is it here? No, I have it inside of my context. I'm gonna hide this little browser preview for a second. How do I do that? There we go. I can show my code. Yeah, so any kind of keyboard input you want to pay attention to, you would handle it here. Up, down, left, right, home, enter, tab, and any kind of number for search querying. That brings me to another system we're gonna take care of, tabbing. Tab focus. I'm just going to call it the tab focus system. So depending on how you think about it, this could be part of your keyboard event system, or it can live on its own thing, depending on how you implement it into your design system, component system, whatever. In this case, I have it as part of my keyboard system. So what do I mean by tabbing? So typically when people build UIs like this, they jump the focus between the button to the menu, and that is where the focus lives. And as soon as you blur from the menu, the menu will close, and that's that. That works very well. It's very simple. However, there are a ton of downsides to this, and that is if you render a custom item where you might need to focus on something within the menu, for example, a button, like an action, you have a list of things, and at the very bottom you have like an add more or add something button. As soon as you click that, the dropdown will close, which is bad. Just because the focus is lost. So you can't rely on the blur mechanism or the blur callback of the dropdown to handle the closing mechanism. You need something else. Oh, so fine, you leverage something else, but now how do you handle tabbing, right? Because if you, hopefully you can, yeah. So there are some UI here to represent focus. Great. So if I jump to here, and if I open my drop-down mechanism, I can press down, whatever. So right now, my focus, you can't really see it, but it's shifted to one of these items. I'm just selecting stuff. You should be able to do this in your drop-down, by the way. This allows the user to be able to read text, select text to be able to read the individual items, which is helpful. For spelling purposes, so if I need to know how the name Madeline is spelled, I can just highlight it. Oops. And the screen reader should be able to like read out all the letters. So as soon as my focus shifts, like say to an individual item, the dropdown should stay open. It should only close if I select something, if I forcibly escape by pressing escape, if I click outside, if I toggle the button, or if I press tab. So the drop-down system needs to be tab aware. So if I press tab, it needs to automatically select the next thing I'm tapping. Or if I'm going to open this one, if I press shift tab, which is the inverse, it needs to select the previous focusable item, like so, and also close the drop down. So you need some sort of tab focus system. In the case of this library, I have some utils that I built maybe 2 years ago that I've just kind of been using since. And this is something I borrowed from Shopify's Polaris. They've handled a lot of low-level things in there that I really, really like. This is something that I borrowed and enhanced since then. Basically, every single time you press tab, the most accurate way you can figure this out is if you do a global query selector for all focusable selectors, right? Inputs, buttons, links, so on. Find all of them and find the current thing within this gigantic list. So for example, if I have 100 buttons, right? And this Madeline drop-down selecting thing happens to be in the middle, exactly in the middle, 50th item. There are mechanisms within this algorithm, mechanisms, whatever it is you want to call it. There's something inside of here that knows how to find it. So if I press tab, I need to find the next item. If I press shift tab, I need to find the previous item. So if it's at the 50th indexed, then if I press tab, it needs to find 51. If I press shift tab, it needs to find 49. And it also needs to consider what happens if it's like the last item, because if if it's 100 out of 100, it can't find 101 because there's no such thing as 101. So it needs to be able to consolidate like what happens if you're at the min or the max edge of the collection. And yeah, so that is a system that's required to work into the tab focusy kind of guy, which again could be as part of your keyboard event system or something else. And this is something I want to touch upon. And this kind of nuance is specific to React. I'm not too familiar with the other big libraries like Vue, Angular, Ember to this level, but I know this is a thing that happens within React. So within React, it uses its own kind of event loop that's going on. So if you bind things on like an on click, an on keyboard down, or sorry, on key down or whatever, works perfectly fine, but it uses React's synthetic events in order to handle things. So in your application, if you have things that are bound globally to like a window add event listener key down, that I believe fires before your on key down thing that you bound inside of your component. And if you've added like event stop propagation or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The global one will just override the thing that you're doing just because you're existing in different event loops. And this is something that personally I've fought with a lot. Because sometimes you really do need to bind events globally. Just because, for example, in this guy, all the up downs, all the everythings, it's bound to the document. It's not bound to the actual menu component itself. That's just because your focus could jump to something else. And once your focus jumps to another thing, in a case where your dropdown needs to stay open, and this is a valid case, then your keyboard events no longer work. So that's bad. So you need to bind that globally. So yeah, this is an example of where within your React system, you have events bound globally, but sometimes you need to have events that interact with your global events. So right now we have a mishmash of things going on. So you need some sort of like, in addition to your keyboard event system, maybe some sort of global keyboard events system. something that will know how to handle all the things you're pressing and that makes sure your application plays nicely with React components or not. So yeah, these are all the things that we need to consider and to build even before we even render this thing. So, right, we have now rendered our select, I think, after setting up some initial context, which is the state manager I have of choice for this particular component, just because it's simple. I mean, personally, I think using something like a Redux or a use reducer from the new Hooks API would be very handy. If you're building complex, low-level primitives, just because not necessarily for the implementation details within the component, but it makes it easier for someone to tap into as a consumer of it to do something with it. A really good example of this is Downshift, which is created by Kenzie Dots. Amazing, amazing developer. And inside of Downshift, they have something called a state reducer. And what the state reducer is, this is a really handy, powerful feature, is inside of Downshift, they're using a Redux-based system where you have actions and types and that manipulate the state. So with a state reducer, it taps into that system where every single time an action is fired, this is your callback hook. And you're able to subscribe essentially to whatever types that it's sending back. And you're able to then, as a user, manipulate the state before it gets saved into the state of Downshift. And this is really handy because there are a ton of events or hooks or action types or whatever it is that goes on within a dropdown. Select, downshift, whatever. So inside of mine, there's already, let me just scroll down. There's already a ton of little bits of state that changes within my little tiny select component. So if you want to broadcast these for subscription purposes, which is a good idea, you can either provide a hook for all of them individually, or you can create a state reducer, which is basically a catch-all. You have one hook that has many, many events attached to it. Not attached to it, but event types associated with it. And then you can subscribe to that and do whatever it is you want. So it's a very, very powerful mechanism. Very elegant, wonderfully designed pattern that I highly recommend. And it's something that if I were to take this and explore further, I would build a state reducer into here. I would refactor all this stuff to use something like a Redux or a use reducer kind of pattern, implement a state reducer, create a bunch of types, and handle it accordingly, just because it's so elegant. So I'm just going to add this to my list here. We need a state reducer. Yeah, we need a state reducer. I guess that could be part of your dropdown system. It's more of a global pattern, but that could be something that could be part of your dropdown. So I'm just gonna move all this stuff here over here. How do I select a bunch of things? There we go. There we go. So right now we have a couple of different buckets of things. We have keyboard events. We have a portal. We have a positioner. Let's see. Maybe I can give these. I'm going to try to give these little section titles. State. What's a good color? Purple. Purple's a good color. So we have something so far that manages state. We have something so far that manages UI. And then we have something that manages events. Cool. What else do we need to build inside of inside of the drop-down thing? Yeah, custom rendering. That is another thing. So there are many, many ways you can go about handling custom rendering. React has a pattern that they recommend called render props. What that does is, let's see, is basically it works sort of like children in that you get typically when you give a React component something inside of sandwich between the tags, it is passed as a children prop, like so, like these all these things are children props. But but a render prop is a custom way of rendering something. So let's say if my portal or render something, it's not set up by the way, so this is something you got to build into your components. So if I do render something, and at this point, your render prop could, this depends on how you want to handle it. Good systems kind of handle a bunch of different cases. So you could invoke or create a React component like so, like that. I'm creating a div. Or you can give it a component to render, whether it's stateless functional, class-based component, whatever. So let's pretend I had something called a custom thing. You can tell it to do that. Or you give it a function, like so, and then you render a thing, like custom thing. In my opinion, this function-based method is probably the most flexible, and it kind of basically it works like a higher order component. It gives you the ability to be able to, as the parent, pass little props for your custom renderer to render. So in the case of downshift, this is something that downshift uses. Again, downshift is great, by the way. Personally, it's not something that I would use, just because there are bits of it that I would just. So let me rephrase. Downshift is designed to be a combo box, something that's input driven, rendering items and so on. I need something even lower level than that. I need like a drop down, a select, and with that select, I'm able to add a input and build accordingly. So for me, downshift isn't. I need something lower level. So downshift, you can see the child that you get from downshift is a render prop. It gives you a bunch of little properties that you can tap into in order for you to have custom rendering. So custom rendering that, let's see, custom rendering, e.g. e.g. render prop. Render prop is just one way to do it. It's probably the most, I think, agreed upon way nowadays in the React community. So yeah, that is how you're able to very easily get things like this, where I'm able to render different sizes text based on based on reasons. And reasons is the best reason of all. Cool. So now we're getting to rendering custom stuff. Great. And yeah, in this case, for our UI select guy, we need a system to handle mouse events. Cool. And one thing to consider for this is, oh boy, this is a very low level detail that it's like, if you get this wrong, it feels very frustrating. So the hover mechanism for these guys, it's not actually tapping into hover or mouse enter. It's using another event callback called mouse move. The reason why you do that is, so let's say I'm hovering over this guy and I want to scroll up and down. I need something in the middle, like so, right? If you're to use hover or mouse enter to handle that interaction, then you'll just be selecting a bunch of stuff as you scroll up and down, unintentionally, just because your mouse is entering all those various items. So instead, you need to tap into mouse move, because the moment your mouse moves over a certain item, you're letting the system, the select, know that this is my intention. My intention is just to select and hover over this guy. So yeah, that's one very tiny but important detail to consider when building something like this. You need to use mouse move. And there's some trickiness that comes with that. One of the things is, well, mouse moves triggers every single pixel that it moves. So you need to do some sort of like logic gate where it's like, well, you've already selected me, so don't do whatever it is you're gonna do, which cancels it out. So you're gonna build that in. That would be under the mouse events. And let's see, there is a, where do I put this? UI, there's another one that we need to consider. Events? Focus jump. I'm just going to call this focus jump. Focus jump. So what I mean by that is, whenever you press up and down inside of this guy, the item needs to be able to scroll into view, always, right? But so what the logic here is, scroll into view the thing that I'm focusing on. Cool, simple enough. So if I'm focused on Dawn, it'll scroll Dawn into view if needed. Sorry, that's the last one. If I focus on Scotty, it'll scroll Scotty into view if needed. Next one, and so on. However, you can also focus with your mouse. So you don't want to scroll things into view when you're focusing with your mouse, just because things will jump around when you go to the edges, like so, like Giovanni or whatever here. Because with your mouse, you would scroll things into view naturally with scrolling like this on your touchpad or your mouse wheel. So you would manually handle the scroll into view thing. So inside of your drop-down select, how I've chosen to handle focus jumping is I've kept inside of state the last interaction. Last interaction. Yeah, last interaction, whether that's a keyboard or a mouse. And to only do focus jumping when the last interaction is a keyboard event. That way it doesn't do anything when you have a mouse event. So that's something else that you gotta consider. Focus jumping. So styling. Next one is styling. This can of worms long topic of how you can think about and handle styling. I'm not going to jump into CSS and JS or any of that kind of stuff, which is, by the way, CSS and JS is something I recommend, but not important. So what I mean by styling is when you're portaling something, right? If you've written CSS styles for your menu to like maybe behave when it's nested in a particular element, as soon as you portal that out, the styles aren't going to apply just because it's no longer in that bit and the cascade doesn't work. So you need to be able to style something from the root body level accurately. And it needs to work every single time. So that's something to consider. That's why I think CSS and JS is really nice, just because it's always coupled with your components. Doesn't matter if they're portaled or not. So if you're using a non-CSS and JS kind of solution, CSS modules, Sass, whatever it is, something to consider. Very, very important stuff. Otherwise, your styles will break. And let me think. I'm just trying to think right now if you would have nested portal things if CSS stuff will clash. I don't think so. So what I mean by nested portal thing. So like I mentioned earlier, depending on your UX UI philosophy, maybe nested modals is not allowed. Fine. But there is a chance where your modal might have selects or dropdowns inside. It's a valid thing to do. So imagine your modal box. I'm just gonna do a space to draw. Okay. So imagine your modal box here, and you have a select that appears and needs to drop outside. And this is another really, really good reason why portaling needs to be a thing. Because if you didn't portal, then your drop-down select is never allowed to drop outside your modal, just because typically modals have overflow hidden or whatever it is inside to make sure scrolling happens or whatever it is. So your drop down will be cut off. So because it's portaled, it's no longer associated with that initial trigger point. It's able to render outside, and now that it's rendering outside, it can render downward. And when this happens, right? Uh, my thinking was just like, could there be style issues if this happens? No, if you use portaling and if you've handled styles correctly. Yes, if you didn't consider portaling and styling. So yeah, that's something else to consider. So what else do we have left? These are all, again, this has nothing really to do with Redux or UI in particular. These are just the various systems that need to exist in order to facilitate all the stuff that's going on. Um, hmm. Next one we'll need is accessibility stuff, which is more of an implementation detail than a system. I'm gonna throw it. I'm gonna add this over here. So accessibility stuff is driven by the specs that you would get from W3 or whatever it is. And those are just things that you need to build into your markup, that's one, and interactions, that's two, that you need to consider. And the interactions are kind of covered based on the events here or whatever it is. So it's worth mentioning, but it's not really a system per se. It's more implementation detail. Focus toggling, shifting. Oh yeah, last one. And that is, I don't even know where to put this. Fuzzy search? Searching. Searching is what I demonstrated way earlier in this very long video now, I'm sure. I apologize. And that is when you start typing stuff, it should be able to jump to the item. So there is a search mechanism, a very, very simple search mechanism built into here that we need to take it into consideration. And I think that's it. Well, there's definitely more. Definitely more. But these are the primary ones that we need to consider when building a drop-down select. And the thing is, so let's just say you want to build, you're building a design system component library, something from scratch, right? I would say a drop-down select is one of the last things you build just because of how many things you're seeing here, how many things you need to consider building first before you can build your drop-down select. And I mean, there are other elements inside of here. So for example, now that we're getting into UI component stuff, a drop-down select is a combination of button, which this is missing, a menu, and menu items, which this is also missing. So it's a combination of various other components. Make sure you build all those guys first before you go attempting to build this. That just makes it way easier because at that point you're just assembling stuff. And your button is guaranteed to work 100% because you've done a very thorough and wonderful job at building that guy. Same with your menu. They're built 100%. So now you bring this in, combine them together to get your UI. Bring in your portal component because you built that 100%. Bring in your positioner solution and so on. And now you have your drop-down select. This is something that a drop-down select, unless you've done this before, is something that you build on top of other systems. It's not like one of the first things you build. And the really wonderful thing about this is once you've built that low-level drop-downy primitive, you're able to then very easily build other UIs using that as the foundation. So a combo box is a really good example, which is what downshift is. You can have custom select UIs. You can have a bunch of things. A filterable drop-downy kind of whatever. You can have a bunch of things, and you can even use the drop-down as your shell. So I've seen UIs where when you've clicked on something, something drops down. Let's pretend this is a trigger. Whoa. So you click on the trigger, this drop-down drops down, And the UI that's represented here is not necessarily a list, but rather more like a carousel or something completely different. Um, the extra options or something that you can poke through. Um, so that could you can construct something like that if you had a low level drop-down select kind of primitive going on, which again is built on top of all these other systems that you're seeing here. So yeah, hopefully this very long-winded video was helpful in helping you folks think about think about components and systems when it comes to building UIs like drop-downs and select. Lots of things going on, and the hope is someone somewhere or a team has worked on all this stuff so that you don't have to think about none of this nonsense when you go about putting a select into the application so that your user can pick the font size that you need. Because, oh boy, all that overhead is taken care of for you. All you need to do is bind the state to your select and you're good to go. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Catch you later. Bye. Ending broadcast now. Hopefully this works.